Okay, some of you. Great. Okay. How many of you have started writing themes? Yeah? Okay, cool. How many of you know about grids? Well, you're about to know a whole heck of a lot more. So, without further ado, Todd, go ahead and do your thing.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Nienkerk. I'm a co-founder of Four Kitchens. We are a open source but primarily Drupal development and design firm headquartered here, founded here. We're currently working with The Economist magazine to move them to Drupal. We're working with Yale University. They're moving their entire university structure to Drupal, department by department. I don't know if anybody here works for UT ITS or has ever worked for UT ITS. I practically did for about a year. They're still sort of stuck in the static HTML page world, and so is Yale, believe it or not, but they are moving to Drupal. So that's sort of a short introduction as to what we do. So, quick personal introduction. I've already gone over this. But I'm also one of the implementers of the new Drupal.org theme, which is being built on the tenets of 960, which is what we're going to discuss this evening. Drupal.org has been in need of a major facelift for years, really. It was a major overhaul to get it running in Drupal 6, and that happened in maybe March or April that it finally launched. If anybody here uses api.drupal.org, that recently relaunched on Drupal 6, and it's faster, and it's looking pretty good. Unfortunately, it looks like we won't get the new Drupal.org rolled out, which was designed by Mark Bolton. He's a British designer, a small firm, and he's actually not really related to the grid thing, but he is one of the founders of the whole grid notion. He, and I'll go over some of that later on, he spoke at South by Southwest in 2006. I'm also a member of the Drupal documentation team. I'm sure all of you, if you've used Drupal long enough, you have some feelings about documentation. I would love to hear them because I know they're probably negative, but we're working on that. There are plenty of third-party books coming out that are pretty good, learn by example stuff, like Lullabot's O'Reilly book is actually quite good. They are a rival firm of ours, but in the world of Drupal, it's sort of co-opetition, so we're all cooperating to compete. All right, so what is a grid system? The grid was originally designed about a century ago. It was designed to lay out pages in some standard way. It was, for its time, very, very modern. So when we look back to the 1910s and 20s, when we had this ornamental design where everything had this sort of, think the entrance to French subways, very flowery, ornamental sort of, I don't know quite how to put it, Terry Gilliam. But this movement, which of course originated in Germany, rationalism and new objectivity, gave way to things like the Helvetica typeface and Bauhaus architecture. So the idea is, of course, function over form. Things should be crisp, neat, laid out, perform a function, do it efficiently. That was the original idea of type layout on a grid. So these typographic grids, after World War II, there were a bunch of graphic designers that were influenced by these ideas. The seminal work on this idea of typography is Die Neue Typographie. It questioned the relevance of conventional page layout and whatnot. So they designed a flexible system to help designers coherently organize a page. So a century ago, the modernists were looking to build a new aesthetic by deriving beauty from the innate qualities of the machine, meaning the printing press. The printing press, if you've ever looked at typesetting, for example, is literally a grid. You're putting these little pieces of type onto a wooden block and pressing that onto a piece of paper. They were also championing standardization. They wanted everybody to work with the same size of page so that printing presses could be cheaper, so that people could work with the same kind of typeface with the same depth of typeface and so forth. So, hey, does this sound familiar? Because today, we web designers are turning to grid-based design to derive beauty from the innate qualities of the machine. Today, that's the browser, and we are trying to champion standardization. So, 16 years after the invention of the web, 1993, we are finally embracing a philosophy that is more than 100 years old. Grid systems on the web, these usually take the form of CSS frameworks. And a framework is defined as a reusable abstraction of code wrapped in a well-defined API. That is, It is a collection of tools and shortcuts designed to minimize code and basically make everybody's lives a lot easier. Examples of frameworks. Everybody here has heard of Ruby on Rails. Well, Ruby is a language. Ruby on Rails is a framework to work with Ruby. jQuery is a JavaScript framework. It takes all of the basic components of JavaScript, all the complicated little bits and gears, and delivers a coherent, boiled down, powerful set of functions that people with minimal coding experience can actually implement. Drupal itself is actually a web application framework. Drupal is not really a CMS. Drupal has graduated far beyond that at this point. It has a very well-defined API. It completely abstracts the database layer, the form layer, the field layer. Exciting new development in Drupal 7. Does anybody here keep up with Drupal 7 and where it's going? Okay. Slight aside, just because it's interesting. We all know that the fundamental piece of something in Drupal is a node, right? So your node is your photograph, YouTube video, article, interview, whatever. In Drupal 7, the fundamental piece is a field. It's no longer a node. A node is merely a collection of fields. So a node can be one field large. It can be a name, it can be a blurb, it can be whatever you want. And then you can expand that to have hundreds of fields, thousands of fields. That's a little ridiculous, but you could. So think CCK. We've all worked with CCK. CCK basically is Drupal. So back to Drupal 6. CSS frameworks. They apply the principle of software frameworks like Drupal, like Ruby on Rails, to web design. They provide standardized rules and shortcuts for browser resets, the Eric Meyer browser reset, if anybody's familiar with that. Typography, there are lots of typography things out there, like TypogGrid-Fi is one of them. Navigation, we've all seen standard approaches to using unordered lists to create fancy menus and things like that. Those are all just shortcuts. And print style, of course, you're going to want some kind of nice print style for your website. And, of course, layout. So when applied to web design, grid systems are basically just CSS frameworks. They provide standardization and shortcuts for building a website's layout very, very quickly. Here's a quote. I'm convinced that the people railing against CSS frameworks are just trying to drum up some false job security. I subscribe to that notion. CSS frameworks are an incredible way, whether you're using one off the shelf or you've made your own, to plow through developing websites very, very quickly with minimal testing, minimal headache. And I'll go over why in a moment. Why use a grid system? It saves time, a lot of time. It saves a lot of money, and it will reduce all of the frustrations that we all face designing websites. So stop reinventing the wheel. It reduces the amount of CSS and markup you need to duplicate each time you start a project. I'm sure we all have our favorite little bits and pieces of CSS from previous projects that we copy and paste into the new project each and every time, and we have to remember, was it this website, that website, where did the Holy Grail layout, anybody familiar with that? The idea of content first. It's kind of complicated because it uses negative margins and all this weird shifting stuff to get things to be placed on a page. It's one of those really complicated things that most people, even the people who invented it, don't remember off the top of their heads. They have to keep these big files of, all right, here's what I did this time. I'm going to copy and paste that here and paste this other thing here. So how about we just stop copying and pasting? How about we just use a CSS framework? There's no need to refer to the old projects to figure out how you implemented a previous one. So stop fixing things and start designing things. It shortens testing phases by providing built-in support for things like IE6, right? It really, really, really does help minimize Internet Explorer hacks in a layout. A well-tested grid system will probably never be the source of your problems. If you're seeing something weird happen on the page, if you have a good CSS framework, you at least don't have to dig that deep to fix it. It's probably something at a higher level, like some block that you put somewhere, or some graphic is stretching some div out of proportion. It's probably not the underlying left, middle, center divs of your site. Also, part of the tenet of designing within grids is to embrace constraints. Some designers will say, I don't like working with grids because it limits my creative expression. First of all, I really don't think that's true. There are ways to use grids and not use grids at the same time. It also